This morning we have Jordan Kauffman, Director of New Person Ministries, here with us this morning to share, and several others that are with him. I'm not sure what he has planned, but at this point I'll turn this service over to Jordan, and he can take it from there.
Good morning. I'm not Jordan Kauffman. My name is Quinn Paston. I'm the program director of the Reading New Person Center. There's a Lancaster New Person Center. And I just wanted to, before Jordan came, to just tell you a little bit about the actual workings and goings on at the facility, at the house that the guys live, that you support. We thank you for that. We thank you for having us here today. I have been with New Person Center for 6 years, and before that I worked with juveniles for 30 years, which that's a thankless job. You know, juveniles, they don't usually come up to you and say, hey, thanks for your help. We really appreciate, your ministry toward us. But because I worked with juveniles for so many years, when that place finally closed, I didn't know what to do. My prayer was just simply, Lord, I don't even know what's good for myself at this point. I went up through the ranks in that place and thought I was going to retire there, but the Lord had something different in mind. And then I saw Jordan's ad for. It wasn't even very clear, and I didn't even know it was working with. The guys that we work with. It was just like, he basically said, hey, do you want to work in ministry? So it was something real simple. And I knew that it was with reentry work. So as I thought about that, I thought to myself, I worked with kids up to 21, from 11 to 21. And I knew very well what their needs were. This was mainly boys for most of those years. And as I thought, these are guys coming out of prison. How am I going to, what am I going to be able to tell them and give to them and offer to their life that I would know how to do, because I worked with kids. And it was real quickly after, I had met Jordan and the founder, John Rush, and folks on the board, the mission that was at New Person, I wanted to be with. And I still thought, what can I offer these guys? But here's what I learned, is that it doesn't matter if you're 11, if you're 21, if you're 30, if you're 50, or if you're 80. You still want love. You still want an opportunity. You still want safety. You still want someone to be able to put their hand on your shoulder and say, hey, you know what, you did a good job. Or the other side, if you need to be reined in, to also do that. And that doesn't matter what age you are at that point. And I realized, what, we all want the same thing, so I do have something to offer. So I've been there for 6 years. And just to give you a little bit about the guys who come to the program, they come, it's a very diverse group, because they come with all different abilities. Some went into prison when they were young. Some went into prison when they were 50. Some had careers when they worked careers and had retirement. Some don't even have enough credits in our Social Security system, in our work system, to collect Social Security. So they look forward to working their entire life. So the other thing is that their crimes are so different. It's the society loves to paint with a broad brush what this is, but what I learned is that crimes are so different, and the guys that we work with, there's not one story, and it isn't simple. You'd have to sit down and spend time with them and understand. And what I've been able to do is to tell my friends, the folks that I know. Most of those years that I worked at a place called New Life, this is New Person, but I worked at a place called New Life, My family and I lived here in Boyertown down by the Gablesville ball field in a development over there. So I'm familiar with the area. And, most the guys who come to the New Person Center, they have so many different needs. Just imagine coming out and not having anything. Sometimes we literally are the ones to give them a toothbrush and a bar of soap. I mean, it's that simple of needs, and they have needs with with regard to reconnecting with family if they're able to do that. They have needs with regard to legal things that they still have. They have parole and different things like that they still have to maintain. Rules and standards and protocols with them. So these guys come in such with varied needs, and we have guys that literally are 19 years old, never had anything in their life, and we've had many folks. We had a psychiatrist, a doctor, in our program not too long ago. Right now we have a guy in the program that has a master's degree in electrical engineering. And these people are wondering, how am I going to be able to even use what I studied my whole life? How do I even go forward with that? And Lee's opening to the service today is very appropriate, because we can't offer everything. We literally don't have jobs to offer them, but they all find jobs. We offer housing, we offer support, but the biggest thing that we offer is hope, and that's what we could give. It's your support, folks like you that just have a heart for ministry, like ours, that keeps those things going. Because when we offer a towel, or when we take a guy, to his first appointments with the doctor, or if we have to, do a resume, these are things that we want to, simple things that get guys started. Here's what I could tell you. Most of the guys come and they're very afraid. They're scared. What is my future? And the first thing is where am I going to live and where am I going to work? And I tell them this all the time. It doesn't make them feel good, but I could tell them that when they leave the New Person Center, they will have a job. When they leave the New Person Center, they will have a home to live in, an apartment. I don't know how that happens. I still don't know how it happens. But I'll tell you this, for 6 years, that's consistently happened. We serve between 60 and 70 people, 60 and 70 men per year. And that's gone on since John Rush started the program, in 2004. And that is really the Lord working. One of our, we have, one of the biggest things is that I tell the guys is that you can get all this working, and you can get back into society, and you can even be productive. But what does it matter if you gain the whole world and lose your soul? So I love what Jordan always says. He even corrected me one time, and I used faith-based. That was too general for him, and I'm thankful that it is, because it's his role as the executive director to uphold that standard. And he said, Quinn, you know what? It's Christ-centered. And that even means more. It meant more to me when he said that. So that's what I'm here to share with you. Jordan is going to be up in a second, but we appreciate your support. And I can guarantee you that on a daily basis, that the work there is profitable and that it's Christ-centered. So we appreciate you guys. Thank you so much. Jordan.
downfall got me in all kinds of, got me in my prison sentence, but like I said, I deserve my God. There was this little Hispanic guy down there in the county prison, and he was a Christian, and he kept talking to me, trying to get me to go to Bible study, and I wasn't very pleasant in the language I used, but he wouldn't give up on me. I said, I'll make you a deal. I'll go one day, just once, but never ask me again. And he promised. So I went one day with Bible study with him, and we got up there, and the teacher said first we sing hymns. I was thinking I ain't going to sing no blank hymns, and they started singing. The more they sang, the more it felt like a knife was in my heart being twisted. I tried to hide the tears. Bible study teacher seen them. Within 2 weeks I accepted Christ, and I never looked back. To get out, it was scary. I didn't know what to expect. It wasn't real. They took me to the bus station, I think it was in Scranton I went to. It was still dark out. And I looked up and seen the clouds, and then seen these two lights in the sky. And for the first 5 minutes, I kept pondering what these lights were. I've got a lot to process yet. I thought I'd want to have a heart attack just seeing the price of a tasty cake pie. When I went in, it was 50 cents. When I come out, it's $2. Come on. I'll be going out, have to retire, medically retire, because I've had a heart attack and a stroke and due to all the drug use, my body's taking so much it can't take no more. So I don't know what the future's going to hold, but I just left that up to God. Here, it really is. It's kind of getting me out of that fear, that shell, or accepting things are real out here. I mean, I am really free. It still feels strange. I was afraid to go back to my home area, even if my parents were going to go on now. Even if I could, I didn't want to run into any old friends because I was afraid they'd drag me back down to that pit I was in. I don't want that. I want the encouragement I'm getting here and the people I've met here. And you gotta have it. You have to have a support system. I told about this place here at Ministries by my counselor in prison. It intrigued me for the fact that when she said John Rush was a Mennonite minister, because as a child I went to Mennonite church, and that fella come, excuse me, I get emotional. To me, it gave me an idea of coming home to a family.
You're very distracting. Do you want to go back to mommy?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Thank you for having us this morning. I also find my kids very distracting. I also apologize if some of you have seen that video before. We just had new ones made, and I put it on a flash drive and left it at my house. So it's good to be with you this morning. Again, like Quinn said, we appreciate the support you guys have given us over the years. And I will add that we're always looking for volunteers, particularly if anyone would like to come and even just lead a Bible study. And I'd say don't let that intimidate you. Most of what I think our guys are looking for is just someone who can come in and talk to them and relate to them and be with them. We've appreciated over the years. Nelson was always a very, very faithful. He actually still volunteers at our place down in Lancaster. But this morning, so the word I'm bringing this morning is from the book of Habakkuk. And I apologize because I'm going to say that wrong pretty much the entire time. I also don't have a specific verse I'm pulling out as I tried to kind of figure that out. It's almost the book is 3 chapters long, and it almost kind of reads like a letter. And I guess I compare it to if you were trying to pull out a quote from like Lord of the Rings, it doesn't really summarize what's going on. So I'm kind of doing an overview of Habakkuk. And it's not a book that I'd say I ever found particularly meaningful. In our small group from church, we're working through some of these, and I was leading this. And so as I kind of studied it and kind of worked through it and looked at some resources, it kind of took on some new meaning. And I think the book sheds a lot of light on the human condition, as our frustrations living in the world but not of the world, and all of our need at our core for a Savior. So just kind of some background with Habakkuk. So it was written in the mid to late 7th century, 50-ish or so years before the book of Daniel. And Habakkuk is a prophet, and he's one of the only ones who he's not talking to the people of Israel. He's not standing there and accusing Israel or telling Israel what they're doing wrong. He is directly addressing God. And it's written like a lament, so he's kind of, in some sense, he's complaining to God, and it's a lot of the, Lord, do you not see, do you not hear? It's written in the final decades of Israel's southern kingdom before Babylon took over, and he saw the threat of Babylon on the horizon. So it hadn't happened yet, but he was able to see kind of what was coming down the road. So in the first chapter of Habakkuk, it starts with his first complaint, and essentially it's, Lord, things are bad, save us. And he cries out and he says, God, you won't do anything about it. And I think we've all been there a little bit and living in that space where we see, things are bad, Lord, save us. Why aren't you doing anything? I want to stay informed, so I try to watch or listen to some news, but I also don't want to know too much because the more I know, the worse it gets. There's a little bit of, again, I want to be informed, but there's a fair amount of ignorance I think I'd prefer to live in, or it can take you to a dark place. And so Habakkuk, he's frustrated at a couple people. He's frustrated at political leaders of Israel, and he's frustrated at the spiritual leaders of Israel. And Israel are kind of lumped together a little bit. He's saying like his political leaders, and I think we can relate to this a little bit. Regardless of which political party you're at, you can look and say, oh, if only the Republicans were in charge, we wouldn't be dealing with this. Or if only the Democrats were in charge, and it doesn't matter who's in charge. This is always the frustration every couple years. But we'd always think things would be better if the other party was in charge. And then you have spiritual leaders. Habakkuk was complaining about the abuse from them. And recently I just saw the Hillsong files or papers are released. I don't know if anybody else looked at that. The Hillsong, this massive church, there was a whistleblower inside and released some of their financial documents. And some of, it's public. So like T.D. Jakes, Joel Osteen, Louis Giglio. There's at least one other one in there that I believe I'm missing. Just how much Hillsong will pay as an honorarium for their speaking engagements. And for most of those, it was 6 figures. So one speaking engagement, Hillsong is paying 6 figures. I think it was Olstein, is getting $150,000 per speaking engagement. Louis Giglio is getting $80,000, and it makes me wonder if I should change my rates. I guess it all depends on where you put the decimal point. I think the point is there's frustrations with, the same frustrations Habakkuk was having are the same frustrations I think we can have inside the church, outside the church. Looking around going, none of this works well, Lord. And so then we see God's response. And God tells Habakkuk, I see it. I see it. I see what's going on. And I'm going to send Babylon to fix things. And so then we have Habakkuk's next complaint. This is not them. Like, yeah, things are bad here, but don't send, like, they're worse. As bad as things are here, like, don't send Babylon. Like, we see what they do. They're much, much worse. And so they do a couple things here. They deify their power. Babylon treats humans like animals, and they devour nations. So Habakkuk's looking at this saying, hey, the things that happen here, these are kind of our problems, and it's bad, but like, I mean, you just see how they treat power. You see how they kind of put humans in a meat grinder. Like, they do all these things, and as you kind of read throughout Scripture, when it talks about, like, Babylon is almost always, even in Revelation, it's like the placekeeper of, like, bad society. This I didn't quite write that, I probably should have, but even in Revelation, when they're talking about, like, the beast coming back, Babylon's always that, like, representation. And so Habakkuk essentially said, God, you need to answer. Why are you doing this? Why would you send these people? And, imagine if our response is constant, in our response to our constant complaining, God speaks to us, and he would say, Jordan, I hear your frustration. I hear your frustration that you're frustrated with your political leaders, and don't worry, I'm sending Vladimir Putin. No, I don't want him. I'm not necessarily a fan, but I don't want him. Or if it's okay, like, I can't stand Donald Trump, I can't stand Joe Biden, and God's like, no, it's okay, I'm going to send Tucker Carlson and Rachel Maddow. It's like, no, don't stop making things you're making things worse, Lord. And so God responds in chapter 2, in verses 2 through 5, and he says, write down what you hear. So he says, justice is coming. There is an appointed time, and though it tarry, wait for it. Though it's coming slow, wait for it. It is coming. And he said, the righteous will live by faith. And that's kind of the summarization of Habakkuk, is how do we live as people when everything around us seems broken? And Habakkuk's kind of a blueprint on how the righteous will live in those times. And so God says, he promises that he will bring Babylon down. The violence and the oppressions of the nation will never end. And just because God uses corrupt nations doesn't mean he endorses them. And then he gets into the second half of chapter 2. God has the 5 woes, 5 things he calls out in nations and kingdom building. It's unjust economics, building wealth through crooked means, slave labor, irresponsible leaders, and some of them, particularly with Israel, they were partying while the poor suffer. So it would, if you get into it, they're talking about, they're drinking, like they're having these like big drinking parties and booze fest, and like the rest of us can't eat, and idolatry, and yeah. So all of this, there's an incredible. I find it all very relatable. Again, you don't have to turn on the news. You don't have to listen long before you hear someone in power where, maybe it's, you're in the middle of COVID and your leader's having a party in Cancun, or you're in the middle of COVID and somebody else is having a major donor party at the fanciest restaurant in California, which both of those happened. And again, that was a Republican and a Democrat. It doesn't really matter which side of the aisle you're on. You can find frustrations with our leaders. And so in chapter 3, there's a little bit of God's answer again to Habakkuk and later generations, and Habakkuk's prayer back. And again, Habakkuk, he's pleading with God to act now, and he describes but he goes on to describe the future defeat of evil. And God will, Habakkuk recognizes that God will save his people at an anointed time. And what you have in Habakkuk 3 is a vision kind of calling back the Exodus when the Israelites were leaving Egypt. There's a lot of, they kind of parallel that with the defeating of evil. the bringing justice to all, and rescuing the oppressed and the innocent. And so there's a kind of a future glimpse here of, as the people of God, we will be rescued from the injustice, all this stuff, kind of the same way as God led his people out of Egypt. And then Habakkuk kind of ends with, even though the world is falling apart, he will choose he will choose joy in the covenant of God. So all that, and then this is kind of the questions for us is, how do we believe that God is good when there's so much tragedy and injustice in the world? And Habakkuk is an example of how the righteous live, believing and yearning for justice in a world that is unjust. And I actually think that as a whole is a pretty good message. I think you could leave it there and says, yeah, you know what? Like, we're in, but not of the world. We live in a kingdom that is, but isn't yet fully realized. And that's great. And that would make me feel not satisfied because I still feel injustice. I still see injustice. But yeah, it leaves you in that space of, yeah, you know what? Eventually God's justice will reign. But then there's a little bit of a twist. It kind of left me feeling unsatisfied because, Habakkuk's complaining specifically about Babylon. And when you hear Babylon, it's always a little dangerous to ask for audience response, but what's the name you think of? The king of Babylon. They had a couple, but the name you think of is Nebuchadnezzar. And yeah, I mean, at times, like, there are other books where, they're just talking about Babylon in general, and they're just saying Nebuchadnezzar. Like, he's kind of the personification of that. And at this point, I don't even believe Nebuchadnezzar was even born. I don't know how, lifespan would have been long enough that he was born yet. But down the road, so, yeah, if you have Habakkuk and, that's all past. And so he went to his grave believing that God's justice will occur on Babylon. And then decades later, maybe a generation, 2 generations later, you have this king who rises up, and you get into the book of Daniel, which I won't go all through the book of Daniel. But as we're waiting for this justice, as we're waiting for those who are in power to fall, you get into Nebuchadnezzar, and I believe it's chapter 4 of the book of Daniel. I think that's that one. Nebuchadnezzar has this experience where he talks about how he lost his mind because he was living that life. He was that king, the personification of all the injustice, all the things that are wrong. And I believe at one point he describes that as he is standing there and he says, "Look what I have done." And when he says that, God humbles him. And it describes as his nails growing long and his hair growing long, and he's Nebuchadnezzar self-describing himself at this point, but and he's like wandering around in the wilderness, and some non-biblical sources were even talking about there was this king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, who had, I think they said 7 years of mental health breakdowns and went crazy. And so they're not acknowledging God, but Nebuchadnezzar eventually, as he's telling his own story, says, at one point, I looked up and I acknowledged that the Lord was God. And then my sanity was restored to me. My kingdom was restored to me. And he's kind of he's writing this letter and exhorting the other nations to acknowledge the Lord as God, which is great. That's also doesn't really feel like justice. I don't know if that feels what Habakkuk was promised. But it's not the first time that this type of thing has happened. You look in the whole book of Jonah, after Jonah runs from God, the last chapter of Jonah, we see a prophet who bitterly watches as God chooses not to destroy a people. And they were Assyrians. The Ninevites, their main god, Assyrians, was Baal. And it was polytheistic. They had a lot of gods. But I was listening to a podcast recently, and they were talking about those who worship Baal and some of the practices, which I won't fully describe because they're pretty horrific. But, I mean, there was infant sacrifice and the way that even happened. Like, it almost made me cry as I was listening to it. And it was, I mean, it's bad. And, which I'll also say Israel invited that in. But that's kind of a side thing. But, so, and I feel for Jonah sitting there and looking down and going, yeah, okay, but look at all the things they've done. Where is the justice for the infants? Where is the justice for all the people they have slaughtered? You know, looking, going, if you're in Israel going, well, Nebuchadnezzar, sure, he gets this, but does he not have to pay for his crimes? Does he not, like, get what's coming to him? This doesn't feel okay. But in spite of everything, Nineveh at that time was spared. In spite of everything, Nebuchadnezzar had his kingdom restored. And so we're left with this grace versus justice. And if we back up to Habakkuk, one of the themes there is that most nations, or all nations as a whole, eventually become Babylon. And, I mean, yeah, as you kind of read, you see through the Bible, nations rise and fall. If you're looking at history from those times where Israel's a little bit more of a small player, you see like the larger nations, rising and falling, and it just kind of rinse and repeat over and over again. So, and in spite of all those things, in spite of Nebuchadnezzar acknowledging God, Babylon eventually still falls. Even though Nineveh, I think the king of Nineveh burned wore sackcloth, and if you watch the VeggieTales, they stopped slapping people with fish. They were fish slappers according to them, but they stopped doing all that. They repented of their ways, but eventually they reverted to their idol worship and their evil ways, which shouldn't be a surprise as we've looked at also the history of Israel. And so, yeah, and any time, so I think in the end there's a couple things that come out of all this. There's a podcast I listen to. It's called the Bema Discipleship Podcast, and it's a Messianic Jew who kind of goes in depth, starting with this creation story. And he doesn't hit every single chapter in the Bible, but he hits a lot of it. And this theme has emerged of, he's the kingdom of shalom. So God chooses Abraham to start his family. So it's God's looking to start a family. So he chooses Abraham. And a lot of the characters have many flaws, but God says, yeah, I can work with them. So he chooses Abraham, and then it becomes the people of Israel. And they are in direct contrast with Egypt. And that's kind of one of the early comparisons and contrasting they do there, is that the kingdom of God is a kingdom of shalom, a kingdom of peace, as opposed to the kingdom of Egypt, which was empire. So God's calling his people to shalom in a different way of essentially nation building. And so any time that we're not in the kingdom of shalom, and you look at the kingdom of empire, I think the theme is here that those things will always rinse and repeat, and empire will always, rise and fall. And so any kingdom that is not the kingdom of God will eventually become the kingdom of Babylon. And again, put a different way, any kingdom that is not a kingdom of shalom, but instead practices empire, will eventually become Babylon. And as individuals, we always, no matter our past and no matter our present position, get offered grace at no cost. So no matter, for an individual, and even for people groups, no matter what you've done, no matter the atrocities that you could have committed, you always have the opportunity to receive grace. Whether you're a fish slapping Assyrian, whether you're Nebuchadnezzar, whether you're a man who has caused great harm to others, or someone who, seeks power, seeks power and control over others. No matter what you have done, you always receive grace. but as a whole, as society, there will eventually be justice. Martin Luther King Jr. had a quote, which I'm going to mess up a little bit here, but he talked about that, his thing was racism, like people are not evil, racism is an evil. And so his thing was, to overcome, to win against racism, you have to bring people to your side. He was kind of like, it doesn't matter, you don't want to demonize people, but you want to bring them into community, into fellowship, because racism, not the people, is evil. And there's a little bit of, the evil that's being committed here, like the people themselves aren't evil, and it's God versus Satan versus the kingdom of darkness. And so with all this, and I'll just end by saying, there's just a little, I just tell my wife on the way here, if you've ever seen Sight and Sound, every single show they do all ends with like Jesus coming out, or at least it used to. And so everything kind of comes back to Jesus in the end. One time when I was in grad school, I was unemployed. And so I had my schoolwork, but it wasn't that strenuous. And I was unemployed. And so in between, I decided that I was going to read through the Bible cover to cover in a shorter period of time. And so I think I ended up doing it like 2.5, 3 months, but I kind of read it like a novel. And it's a little bit different when you read it like that, because it's almost like, if you get into plot and how you write novels, and you have your action and your up and down ebbs and flows until you hit the climax. And the Bible kind of reads the same way, where it starts on a high note with the creation, and you have characters and you have high notes and low notes. But as you get into the Kings, it's always up. And then it's down. Sometimes it's down for a while. And it's like watching a movie where you're like, I just wish they'd stop doing this. And then you hit Jesus. And it's like, oh, this is the climax. This is where the story turns. And not that everything is solved after that, but everything after that, it's under control. And, and we live in an unjust society, but we live in that post climax there, where Jesus has come and there is justice there, and we'll find pockets of the kingdom of shalom, and we are called to be a royal priesthood of God's kingdom of shalom. So we are all meant to be priests in that kingdom, and though we may not look or realize it, we live on a battlefield that has already been decided. That kingdom is again the kingdom that has been won, but is and is yet to come. The kingdom of shalom, justice, and grace. So again, thank you guys for having us this morning. Thank you for support over the years. Again, I think we'll be around for a little bit afterwards, and we always welcome, always looking for volunteers, always welcome questions and all that kind of stuff as well. So thank you.